this panel. So today we're really focusing on sustainable forestry, and we know as an asset class, it's a highly impactful asset class for both impact on people and on the planet when these investments are managed well. And therefore it's a sector that DFIs have been investing in for many years. Today, the focus of our discussion is just on one of these positive impacts, which is the carbon removed or sequestered through forestry investments. And to better understand this, CDC, together with Finnfund, Swedfund and FMO, have partnered with Simosol to develop the FRESCOS tool, which I'm very glad to announce can be found at www.frescoes.earth, live as of this morning. The agenda for today is to dive in on this impact. So Ilkka Normuniaki from Finnfund will take us through the story behind the FRESCOS tool. We'll then hand over to Joram from FMO to talk about the future of emissions accounting and the importance of carbon removals within this complex area. Finally, the bit we've probably all been waiting for, Juho Pentila from Simosol, who've built the tool, will demonstrate the tool and its functionality. And then we'll move into a panel discussion. So please do add your questions in the chat. A couple of housekeeping rules before I introduce Ilkka. So the event is going to be recorded. Please do ask your questions in the chat for the panel discussion. And after the event, we will send a feedback form. So please do let us know your thoughts about the event so we can shape the next one. So to introduce Ilkka. Ilkka Normuniaki is a senior investment manager at Finnfund. He's got more than 15 years of experience in forestry in emerging markets, and particularly in Africa. In his previous position, he was head of the forestry consulting firm Indafor, or head of forestry consulting at Indafor, and one of the leading global forestry consulting companies. So currently he's senior investment manager at Finnfund, responsible for forestry investments, including origination and structuring. So Ilkka, please do take us through the story behind FRESCOS.
Thank you, Ellen, a lot for the introduction, and welcome to all the participants. It's quite exciting to see that so many have joined. I'm actually quite surprised that this is interesting so many people, and I'm very happy about it. It's obviously a topic which is quite hot, and therefore we are very happy that we can contribute to the discussion as a group of DFIs. Ellen was mentioning that we will be talking mostly about the climate impact of forestry, but I will touch a little bit on sustainable forestry as a business or an asset class and what other impacts it can bring. I will also tell you a little bit about the background why we wanted to create this FRESCOS tool, and also provide you with a practical example on how we at Finnfund are using it. So I know that Ellen changed the slides, so can you go please to the first one actually? Sorry, there seems to be a bit of a timing lag here, but anyway. So a little bit of background on why we are investing into sustainable forestry in the first place. We spoke about the climate change, and that's obviously something which is becoming increasingly important. At Finnfund, we have been investing into sustainable forestry already for approximately 3 decades, and currently more than 20% of our invested capital is in forestry in emerging markets. In recent years, it has become increasingly clear that forests and how we manage the forest play an important role in the combat against the climate change. To mitigate the effects of climate change, we need to halt deforestation, we need to preserve remaining natural forests, and the forests that are under commercial management need to be managed in a sustainable way. Besides climate change, loss of biodiversity is one other key threat that we really need to address. At Finnfund, we believe that sustainable forestry can contribute to enhancing biodiversity and to preserving intact landscapes as long as forestry is done sustainably. I'll just give you a very short example on the biodiversity impacts. We have one investee company which is actually at the moment preserving 70% of the land area that it occupies. The 30% area remaining is used for growing commercial plantations. Now the project is in an area where the pressure on land is extremely high, and we are quite certain that the only reason why the 70% of the natural forest is still remaining is because of the economic activity within the 30% area that the company manages sustainably. Now, besides the two key threats, climate change and deforestation, which are obviously global challenges, and obviously not one project or not one company can resolve it by themselves. So it's also good to note that climate impact is not the only reason why we invest in forestry. There are a multitude of impacts on local level, where even a small sustainable forestry project can contribute to local challenges through many impacts, such as employment. These are typically in areas where decent jobs are desperately needed. Also, renewable products from sustainably managed forest can replace products made of concrete, oil, and so forth. And forest industry can bring significant revenues to economies which rely heavily on imported wood products. In order for these impacts to be real and in order for them to be long-term, business practices need to be obviously sustainable, but they also need to be profitable to ensure the continuity of any forest project and also the long-term impact that we want to create. So that being said, many DFIs and other impact investors are currently finding ways to invest into forestry. The 4 DFIs that are now participating in this FRESCOS event, we have already invested more than 350 million euros into forestry in emerging markets, and of this amount, more than half is invested into Africa. Next slide, please. So why did we want to create this FRESCOS tool? Like said, climate impact is obviously important aspect why we finance forestry. And we are part of the European Development Finance Institution community, and we have jointly stated that we want to reach carbon net zero investment portfolio at the latest by 2050. In order to reach that goal, it's quite evident that we have to invest into projects that are not only carbon neutral, but they have to be carbon negative. So they need to capture more carbon than what they emit. Therefore, many of the DFIs, we are already investing, or we are considering to invest into forestry projects which sequester more carbon than what they emit. In order to verify that the carbon footprint actually is negative, we need to be reliably accounting for the carbon removals as well as the emissions. And it has to be done in a robust, in a scientific way, and it needs to be transparent. So we came up with the idea of a tool that would allow consistent reporting of the carbon footprint of our forestry projects. Then we teamed up with a group of DFIs, which are here, so CDC, FMO, and Swedfund. And then we contracted Simosol to develop the tool, which is then based on the IPCC guidelines for carbon removals. It's also good to note that each forestry project which we have invested in and which we will be investing in, they are all different. And therefore, there is the tool that we wanted to create need to capture the different aspects of these projects. It needs to be flexible enough so that it allows for different types of forestry projects to be included, and it needs to be able to absorb different levels of data which are different to each company and each project. We also wanted that the tool can be used to estimate the carbon footprint at a certain fixed time point, i.e. the sequestration in year X, but also we wanted that it can actually allow for scenario analysis for long-term climate impact of our forestry investments. Next slide, please. So coming to the practical approach and what does this mean? What does the FRESCOS tool do? So this spring we carried out the first run on the tool to estimate the carbon footprint of Finnfund's portfolio. Currently, our portfolio consists of about 15 forestry projects, and given that Finnfund has invested significantly into these carbon negative forestry projects, our investment portfolio carbon footprint at the end of the 2019 was actually negative. We announced the result last month. You might have seen that in social media or elsewhere. And just last week, our board of directors actually signed off on a new policy on climate and energy, where Finnfund is committing to remain carbon negative also in the future. Next slide, please. Here you will see some details on our portfolio and how the carbon footprint is formed. So if you look into the right-hand side of the slide, so the upper graph, you will see the carbon emissions from our investee companies, and you will also see the removals. So the emissions currently are roughly 105,000 tons annually, and the removals are minus 240,000 tons. So it means that the balance is roughly minus 135,000 tons, which is comfortably below net neutral. So we are quite comfortable actually saying that it's a strong statement to say that we are carbon negative, but with the calculation that we have done, we are quite comfortable that this actually is the case. Then I just wanted to make a small note on how different forestry project can be. So it doesn't mean that if you invest into forestry, it would always be carbon negative. So if you look at the pie chart, it gives an indication of the carbon sequestration of our individual forestry projects. So currently, Finnfund's investee companies plant more than 5,000 new hectares per year, which means more than 5 million trees planted each year. And this is, of course, on top of replanting everything that is harvested. So the impact or amount of sequestration depends on the age structure of the forest, as well as the amount of new area that is planted each year. In simple terms, this means that the growth of the forest biomass needs to be more than the removed biomass. So as I said before, we are quite happy and quite comfortable in saying that our investment portfolio is currently carbon negative, and we are committed to staying that way. This means that we will be investing into forestry also in the future, and we welcome any other investor to join us. We also hope that this tool can be of help for other institutions, not just investors, but also for forestry companies or anybody who is interested in understanding more on the carbon sequestration of forests. Thank you. I'll give it now to Ellen.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Ilkka. So now I'm pleased to introduce Joram Traven from FMO. Joram is going to speak to us about the future of carbon accounting and why carbon removals play such an important role of that. Joram is the Director of Impact and ESG at FMO, the Dutch Development Bank, and before this role he's held various positions, including Director of Strategy and Corporate Affairs and Chairman of the Investment Committee. He was also a board member of the Eco Business Biodiversity Fund and investee of FMO. So biodiversity and climate impact surely close to his heart. So Joram, please talk to us about the future of carbon accounting.
Thank you, Ellen, for your kind introduction and the opportunity to speak today really about the importance of this tool and where it sits in the global space, if you will, the architecture of carbon accounting. Maybe nice to start with a metaphor that I like to use to make sense in a rather simple way of what's a pretty complex field by now of carbon accounting. I'd like to think about the problem of sticking to 1.5 degrees by thinking of a car that is speeding towards a cliff edge, and it's gradually going steeper and steeper down. And if you continue down that slope, at some point you actually reach a slope that's so steep that you can't even put it in reverse anymore. That's when you get runaway climate change at 4 to 6 degrees essentially. Now we're not there yet. We're at 1 degree now. Steep. The slope is getting steeper, if you will. But yeah. So where does this all go? So if you look at this car, how do you make sense of how you should decelerate, where you should stop, and potentially when you should put the car into reverse? I think most institutions have been talking a lot about avoiding emissions. But essentially, that's only saying something about how you're decelerating your speed. And the actual speed is the emissions that you're emitting. That tells you something. How fast am I driving to that point of 1.5 degrees? And then you still need the distance. And I think the distance is actually the global carbon budget that we have left, which sadly is reducing by the day. So today it's actually 273 gigatons that we still have left globally before we're surpassing that 1.5 degree point. Now that's a pretty low budget. It's, I think, at the current rate of emissions about 6.5 years that we get there. So we're in a rush, but I think it also tells us something in terms of the need to put that car into reverse at some point. I mean, you already see on this slide that almost all of the 1.5 degree scenarios have essentially net negative emissions at some point beyond 2070, and we need to be net neutral certainly by 2050 to get there. So that involves negative emissions, and I think that's specifically where the FRESCO tool comes in. Now, when FMO set its 1.5 degree ambition quite a few years back, at that point we actually had no clue how to get there, because we were missing two crucial pieces of the puzzle. The first piece was, how do we even relate our portfolio to that global budget of, well, by now only 273 gigatons left. And that meant we needed to construct essentially a pathway similar to the one that you see on this slide. Essentially, these are, if you will, the kind of the speed signs on the side of the road. How fast can you responsibly drive at each point in time? But then, of course, you also actually need to construct that speedometer. Next slide, please. And that's how you actually measure how much you're emitting. So that's where we got started together with a number of other financial institutions in the Netherlands on PCAF, the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials. And I think a lot of very good work was done by that group to build up carbon accounting principles that would allow financial institutions to actually measure that speed. And we actually offered our first report, as you can see here, to the Dutch climate envoy at the COP in Katowice, and things moved on from there. Next slide, please. So PCAF actually got quite some uptake, and ultimately went global with its carbon accounting standards, which is super exciting. I think now there's many very large financial institutions using the PCAF principles to actually measure their speed. And they're using typically different speed signs. So some institutions like FMO are saying we're going for 1.5 degrees. You'll have heard Finnfund, who are even more ambitious, and say we want to be net negative. There's also some financial institutions that are still sticking to a 2-degree pathway, but at least we're all working with the same principles to construct our speedometers. Next slide, please. And I think that's then evolved into a global carbon accounting standard, which is really great. And I think that kind of harmonization is absolutely needed. Now, one of the key problems is essentially that I think we're getting increasingly good globally at measuring positive speed, essentially these emissions. Where there was a real gap is in measuring the speed when the car goes into the reverse. And how do you measure the negative emissions? And I think that's where FRESCOS ultimately comes in. Next slide, please. So what we're very excited about is that we now have a tool that can actually measure negative emissions of a pretty important sector, and one of the key sectors I think that will help us all buy some time for the transition that we all need, and that is forestry. Take some real carbon out of the air as soon as we can, so that we can buy time and space for the big transitions that are certainly needed to get to net neutral and probably net negative by the end of century. And to have a harmonized tool that we can all use together to measure our reverse speed, I think is absolutely essential. So we're very excited to be able to launch this tool together with everybody and to learn to use it and hopefully also improve it over time. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Joram. And I think a great reminder to wake us all up halfway through the event that we've got 6 years left of the carbon budget that we need for 1.5. I mean, if there's one thing we all remember, hopefully from the event, it will be this, and also the FRESCOS web address, of course. So that's probably quite a nice reason to bring in Juho here, who is Head of Carbon and Earth Solutions at Simosol, and Simosol have been our excellent partner for building the tool that you're about to see. So Juho, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about the methodology behind the tool and then show us a sneak peek behind the hood.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. I hope you are hearing me all right. Also on my and Simosol's behalf, nice to see so many of you participating and showing interest on what we have been working on. Just a few words about Simosol for those who are not maybe aware of us. So we are a private company from Finland, and we are consisted of team of foresters, data scientists, and programmers. And basically, for the last 10+ years, we have been knitting together forestry and IT solutions, such as FRESCOS. So just with one slide before jumping to the tool about FRESCOS in general. So basically, as Ilkka already explained, FRESCOS is designed for kind of two use cases. So we have a functionality for annual accounting, which focuses on calculating the annual impact for a specific year. But then there's also a functionality for calculating long-term scenarios of how the carbon stocks develop and how the annual impacts evolve with the maximum of 100-year scenario length. In terms of kind of carbon scope, FRESCOS is divided or includes 4 carbon pools. So FRESCOS covers the carbon that is stored in the standing stock and its biomass. It also includes the dead organic matter that is stored in the dead wood and litter, and then the organic soil carbon, which stores carbon originating from the biomass, and that is then stored in the soil in various stages of decomposition. And lastly but not least, FRESCOS also covers the carbon that is stored in the harvested wood products that are manufactured out of that is harvested from the forests. From the land uses, FRESCOS is separated into different views or kind of modules. So you can calculate combination or separately the carbon figures for land areas which are in forest plantations, basically meaning land that is planted with trees for forestry purposes. Then we have a module for agroforestry, which is agricultural land that includes also standing trees. And then we have natural forest and other land uses, which is kind of a module that allows inclusion of other kind of set aside areas that might be included in the projects like riparian zones or protected natural forest or so on, that the user would prefer still to include within the kind of project's scope. But with those remarks, let's jump into the real case. So I'll grab the screen. Hopefully you are seeing my screen now. Ellen, if you can nod. Okay, so here we are now in the FRESCOS sort of main view after login. So after logging into the tool, you will enter into this main projects. And here you basically have listed, here you have a list of all the projects that you have under your user account. On the top right corner, you can create additional projects, and then from the table you can select existing projects and continue working with those. So when you create a project, you are prompted up with the set of information and details. Then after creation of the project, also shown here in the summary view of each. And while most of the things are still editable afterwards, a thing that is set when creating a project is this level of accuracy. So FRESCOS includes several of things and aspects that have kind of have a kind of a different waterfall impacts, and I try to cover the most important ones over this short demo here. So one of the key things is the accuracy level and accuracy selection. So FRESCOS includes two options for it. When you create a project, you can select either higher accuracy or lower accuracy. The key impact of that relates to the inputs that are required by the user. So higher accuracy focuses on calculations on a sort of stand level basis. So with higher accuracy, you select the species, you define the growth rates, and so on for each stand, and that also unlocks the harvested wood products pool and other things to be calculated for. The lower accuracy is basically sort of IPCC tier 1, whether that rings a bell for someone. So basically building on default biomass and carbon values per hectare for specific climate domains for specific regions and continents. But the higher accuracy is sort of the beef of FRESCOS, and that's why we have focused on that in today's demo session. Another key thing is on the top of the page, you can see a year number, and that's called a sort of data year. And that serves two key purposes in FRESCOS calculations. So that is the year for the annual accounting. So the year of impact, if you are calculating impact for a while. It also acts as a starting year for the scenario analysis. And that relating then on a bit below on the page, you see the calculation setup. So here you can select whether you are calculating for the annual carbon impact or for the scenario analysis. So you can calculate the both at the same time, but keep in mind that this year then applies for both of those, or you calculate just for the other. And basically how the data years are implemented is that it acts as a parallel data sets under a specific project. So you can add more data years, copy data years, add some data there and so on. And it's basically an additional data set within the same project. Here you can also then import and export individual data years with an Excel template. for more complex projects. So moving on from there. The first view, after the summary view, we enter to the views that consist the main input functionalities, data input functionalities of FRESCOS. So here under forest plantations, now that we have the higher accuracy selected, and the selected accuracy for this project is shown in the top right. For those who are familiar with stand registers and forest inventory data, might find it simplest to understand what is shown here as sort of stand register table. So each row represents a vintage, a parcel of land that is planted with certain species in a certain year, which is managed under certain management rotation and has a certain growth estimation or assumption for that parcel of land. Here you can add more rows, as many as are needed. For example, to consist what is on the ground today, when those stands have been planted and with what species and so on. We have some neat functionalities here for copying existing rows. You can just, if you have similar vintages, but just the planting year changes, you can copy the row and so on. You can edit those, so on and so forth. Once that is done, then the next we have agroforestry view, which is basically pretty much the same as forest plantations, with a minor addition that we have also additional biomass layers. So in agroforestry projects, you might have some additional layers, permanent plants that are planted underneath the canopies or in between the trees or so on, that you would like to include in your carbon estimations and calculations, and agroforestry module allows that to happen. Then we move to the harvested wood products. So this is basically the view where the users enter the harvest data. What is harvested from the project at each year. Here in the demonstration, I had only the 100 hectares, one row of data. So I've inserted here now harvests for those 100 hectares, which is managed with 15-year rotation. So every 15 years there are harvests occurring. The key functionalities here are then the parameters, how that volume is allocated into different wood product categories. So we have the allocation for allocation of the roundwood, as well as then the utilization rates, meaning the recovery rates of that roundwood, that how much of that roundwood that is allocated for each product category, how much of that roundwood and the carbon that is stored within ends up in the final products themselves. There is also a functionality that you can automate the harvests based on the harvest cycle you have inserted, and that is another option, but for the demonstration purposes, we are now going to run with this manual harvests. And if you would be calculating just annual impact, annual accounting, you would only need to insert then one harvest year, or the harvests that are occurring on your accounting year. Last but not the least, before the results themselves, there is the natural forest and other module. As explained earlier, it allows inclusion of other areas, natural forest areas, protected areas, riparian areas, or cropland areas, or something that you would like to, land areas that you would like to include in your calculations that are within the project, but maybe you don't have such detailed information or assumptions for those for those areas. So then we go to the results view. Here we then the system calculates basically the results then here on the fly. So based on the inputs you have selected, based on the calculation scope, so whether you are calculating annual accounting and or scenario analysis, the results view shows those numbers accordingly. So as I have now both of those components selected, I can see the both of those components here in the results view. For the annual accounting, basically the results view includes the total carbon storage in the accounting year, as well as the current annual change in stocks as annual emission removals here on the right side. For the scenario analysis, then we have some default charts that show the net change per carbon pool. So here we can see basically the net sequestration of carbon, and then at the harvesting years, as the biomass storage is kind of removed from the site, that causes a spike downwards. And here in the other graph, we see the kind of cumulative development of the overall carbon storages over this 50-year period that I had selected, basically over 3 rotations here. And we can also see that the harvested wood products accumulates over these 3 rotations. On the top hand here, where we have the download report button, which then prompts an Excel sheet that includes all these figures and for all the land uses, and so for then further post-processing and embedding in your own reporting. I see I'm running a bit out of time. Just quickly coming back to the main view, just to run through the left-hand side, we have some main tabs. So in tree species, you can add more species, add your own parameters here, and then use those species in your calculations. We have also the full methodology description available here. You can read it here or download the PDF. And this includes basically the whole a more in-depth description, how different pools and how different accuracies are formed, what kind of methodologies we are using in the background, and what are the sources, and so on and so forth. And then last but not the least, as you work with FRESCOS, you might encounter some terms, abbreviations that doesn't ring a bell. We have here in glossary a nice table that you can sort by topic, by abbreviation, whatever, and should be including more or less all the key things and key terms in the tool. Lastly, if you have any questions or want more information, feel free to drop a message to support@frescos.earth or use the form that is included here in the help view. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Juho. It's great to see the tool, and it's great that it's up and out there now for people to go on to. So yeah, really good to see that. So I'm now going to invite Ilkka and Joran back onto camera as we move into our panel discussion section of the event. So I see some of you have already been putting your questions in the chat. Thank you so much. Please do keep adding to them. So Ilkka, I'm going to kick off with a question for you. So actually 2 questions, if I may. First question is, what do you think the benefit to a forestry company or an investor is from using this tool? And secondly, we have a question about carbon accounting for Finnfund. So congratulations on your net negative portfolio. I'm curious, if one of your portfolio is selling carbon credits to third parties, do you deduct those amounts from the amounts of carbon sequestration you include in your own calculations?
Thank you, Ellen. For an investor, obviously, I think the main benefit of the tool is really the flexibility. We've invested, for example, in about 15 different projects, and each of them are different, and the data sets that we get from the companies are all different. So the tool that we are using needs to be flexible and has to be able to be adjusted to different types of projects. The second major benefit is that we can report the one exact time point. How does the carbon footprint of our portfolio look like? But also when we do due diligence on our new projects, we need to be able to see the scenario into long term. How does it look like in the future? How is it going to change over the years? Maybe last but not least, it's fairly easy to use. I have used it myself, and it's rather easy to use once you get a hang of the sort of the forestry parameters. For me, it's fairly obvious because I'm a forester by training, but you need to have a basic knowledge on forestry. Oh, and on the second one, it's a good question. In principle, we do absolute accounting, which means that we account for the absolute finest emissions and removals of our investments. So basically, we do not account for the third-party schemes or the credits, so to say. And this goes both ways. So if we have investments into high emission sectors who compensate their emissions by buying carbon credits, we don't account them, and vice versa. If our companies sell credits, we don't account them. So this is one topic that we probably want to develop further, and we may be reporting this separately in the years to come. But getting sufficient data on that is not that easy. So it will take some time before we can report it.
Yeah, no, thank you. That makes sense. And Joram, I wonder if I can bring you here in to talk about the work that PCAF is looking to do on removals accounting. And then I have a second question for you as well, Joram, if I may. So why did we decide as a group of DFIs to make this tool free?
Right. So on the first question, it is indeed a challenging issue. I would say, in a way, similar to your positive and negative emissions. It's just helpful at some point to separate them out, right? Because it's about giving transparency on the progress you're making. And this would be, I think, another issue where at some point we should get to a level of quality of reporting and data gathering where we can just report on these credits being bought and sold. And I think that's also the direction PCAF is currently taking. They're looking into this specific issue and they are developing some guidance on it. So I think we're looking forward to receiving that as well. On the question of making the tool free, I think there essentially what we're aiming to create is a global good. And we're modeling it a bit on the success of PCAF that we've seen kind of with a gradual start and then moving very rapidly across the globe. So I think that's exactly what we hope the FRESCO tools will also be doing by making it free. It really stimulates fast adoption, enabling us to actually improve it also over time based on the feedback that we get. I think together also at CDC and the others, we've funded it from our TA program, and we're looking to fund it for a number of years so that it remains current and fresh, if you will, so that we can continue to improve it and help it become a global standard similar to PCAF. So I think that's the thinking behind it for now, but certainly in a couple of years, it would be great if we can generate enough kind of fee income or whatever it may be at that point for the standard at least to maintain itself, because it will need funding in the future as well. But for now, TA is helping us all to create this public good.
Yeah, no, thank you. Exactly. I mean, that's definitely the purpose behind it, and we hope that many people from the event today will be using the tool. And so, Juho, if I may bring you in here, talking about the tool and the methodologies that it's built on, how does FRESCOS differ from the other carbon tools that might be out there in the market, and which guidelines and methodologies is FRESCOS built on? So you touched on that second question a little bit earlier, but it would be great to get your view on the difference between FRESCOS and the other tools, and which guidelines we've built it on.
Sure. Yeah, and of course that's a very to the point question. I think the main difference to other tools, I'd like to turn it in a way that the way I see it, FRESCOS is something that really we haven't seen before as such, as technology in a way, as how it is implemented and how it is made accessible, and how it can be used. So as such, I mean, having a such web-based user interface that you can log in and have multiple projects within there. A web-based user interface, of course, allows us for improving the user experience, improving the tool itself on the go as well. In contrast, what I've encountered before have been quite complex Excel-based calculators, for example, that are not so upkept, might be several years at least between updates or corrections and so on. So I see that is a main differentiating factor there. And of course, FRESCOS is as such, from the methodological perspective, it's quite flexible, as Ilkka also mentioned, that it allows various kind of and various level of user inputs to be provided. Mainly, of course, it has the different accuracy levels, the selections you can make there, but then also the land uses and what you can provide there, and kind of what are additional information and what are the minimum information. There's a lot of flexibilities around there for getting the best possible estimation with the input data that you have available. It is also flexible in terms of the temporal scope and the carbon scope, as explained. So you can calculate anything from annual impacts into 100-year scenarios, as well as include not just the above ground biomass, but also the whole biomass, soil, dead wood, and the harvested wood products in your calculation scope. In terms of the methodologies, as said, there's a strong reference to IPCC guidelines, especially regarding, for example, the soil and the tier 1 calculations. Basically, FRESCOS has built in the latest IPCC default values and tables. So based on the, but also what FRESCOS does is making the use of those values as easy as possible. So as you choose your climate domain and your continent you are working on with your project, FRESCOS automatically provides you the correct values that IPCC has established for those locations. But I think that's more or less it.
Brilliant. Juha, I might follow up with you actually, because I've been combing the chat and we've had some really great technical questions. So it feels like we've got a lot of forestry experts and interested people on the line. So I'm going to hit you with some now. Does the tool also calculate carbon emissions from investments in other sectors, not only forestry, or is it a forestry tool only? And I wondered if the tool considers deforestation or degradation at all, or if the forest cover change is included.
Yes. So first one. Sorry, what was the first one about?
Does the tool calculate carbon emissions from investments in other sectors, or is it just a forestry tool?
Exactly. So yes, FRESCOS is as such, as itself, it's limited to the carbon sequestration, basically the carbon emission removals, as they are called in the results as of now, and kind of then calculating the net impact of portfolio, for example, is subject for post-processing of the results. And the other was about conversion.
Yeah, deforestation and degradation of land. How's that accounted for in the tool?
Yes. So there's a field called disturbance rate, which is basically causes and an annual reduction in the standing stock biomass. So that is something that can be worked with. So basically, if you have a certain deforestation scenario, you can create a tier 1 project, for example, for natural forests of certain location, and use the disturbance rate as a factor for the deforestation rate. And for example, if you're using that as a baseline calculation or whatever that allows it as such. So there is a disturbance rate which basically is meant kind of for that purpose, but making it possible for accounting any disturbances if such are expected. Regarding the conversion of land, there is this kind of previous land use and especially the impacts into soil carbon because of land conversion. So for that we apply the IPCC's approach. So there is a 20-year transition period. So basically, if a project has parcels of land that have been, for example, converted into forestry within the last 20 years, and have been previously, for example, some degraded grasslands or similar, FRESCOS allows then kind of estimation of the impact of forestry regarding soil carbon for that.
Great, thank you, Johan. One more that's come through on the chat about that functionality actually of a retrospective look. Just to confirm, the question is, some projects have a time frame that would be previous to when we're invested, normally between 3 to 5 years. Can you use FRESCOS for forestry projects that are older, but the plantations are continuing to sequester carbon?
Yes. So it's basically, you can play around a lot with the data year function that we discussed briefly. So basically that can be also historical year, and you can calculate your kind of scenarios from historical year onwards with that function. Just to clarify, if you have a data year set for a specific year, and you naturally have usually stands that are planted before that year, what the calculation does, it automatically, the starting point is the year that you have on your top of the page as your data year, but whatever has been planted before that is modeled to the current stock at the data year that you have set.
Great, thank you. I think that might have been our final question, as we need to finish up soon, but thank you all for both putting your questions in the chat. Thank you for the audience participation, and thank you to our panelists for answering those. I'm now going to welcome Gustav from Swedfund, who's going to close our event today. So Gustav Thoren is an investment manager at Swedfund, and Swedfund is the Swedish DFI and the fourth partner in the DFI consortium who have organised today's event. Swedfund have identified forestry as a key focus area for future investments and therefore are the fourth partner in the tool. So Gustav, hand over to you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for a very good discussion panel. Well, that brings us to the end of this launch. And I'd like to summarize by saying that as development finances, climate change mitigation and adaptation are at the very core of our work. And we strive to better understand and manage our investments also in terms of carbon sequestration. Swedfund is, like many other development finance, committed to the targets of the Paris Agreement, and we are proud to launch this tool together with our partners. We have not yet made any investments into forestry, but we have identified forestry as an interesting sector, not only from the climate perspective, but also from a wider impact perspective. As we are new to the sector, Swedfund needs good tools to enable good decision making, and we believe that the investment that we made into this tool will contribute to a better understanding of the climate impact of sustainable forestry, and as a step towards more science-based decision making. We sincerely appreciate the attention of the audience today, and I would specifically like to thank Ellen from CDC for moderating. I'd like to thank Ilka from Finnfund for introducing sustainable forestry and the key drivers for developing this tool. Joram from FMO for an excellent overview of carbon accounting and a great car analogy. Thank you very much for that one. And Joel from Simosol for a great overview of the tool. I mean, we've worked quite close to you with this, and we really appreciate the work that Simosol has put into this tool. Thank you again, and we encourage you all to use this tool within your own organization. And you can access it by typing in the address showed on screen soon, I think, Ellen. Great, so this address is https://frescoes.earth, and it should be live as of now. So thank you very much, and appreciate you taking your time to join us this afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.